drink the Kool-Aid? Am I looking in on the wrong places? Is my body just space? I can't stand it. It's searching for why I can't find any more rhythms. I pray that she'll show me outside. If I let go of holding tightly, will I see Jesus in a stranger tonight? The devil hides in Coca-Cola, but if I'm high, will I be more qualified? Cause in my Elvis Presley record, I found the light, and my books say I'm a badass for just $12.99. Maybe I'll trace it to my family, but maybe some things should be buried alive. It's searching for why I can't find any more rhythms. I pray that she'll show me inside. I surrender to you. I'm giving up. I'm giving up. I surrender to you. I'm giving up. Am I gonna get better? It's searching for why I can't find. I'm looking for rhythms. I pray that she'll show me outside. It's searching for why I can't find. I'm looking for rhythms. She'll show me outside.
And hey there, everybody. Welcome back. We are broadcasting live from the apocalypse in a concrete bunker deep on the banks of the Halifax River. I hope you're healthy. I hope you're happy. This is going to be a weird ride into the new normal. So take my hand, use plenty of hand sanitizer, and we are going to start our conversation with a friend of mine who I am happy to be spending this time with, Seth Jones. Seth, let's make some noise. Is your mic on?
It is.
All right, fantastic. Perfect. So first of all, are you healthy? Are you good?
I'm healthy. I'm good. I am blessed in this time of craziness.
And what have you been up to in because you do a lot of live performance, right? As a DJ and a musician and a whole variety of other things. So I imagine a lot of that work has been on hold, hasn't it?
It has. My touring is kind of off and on. So I toured the first part of last year, but I had a handful of shows at the end of last year, but I haven't actually done much touring this year. So it hasn't really interrupted much of my touring schedule, but it's interrupted a lot of other things.
So apart from touring, as describe what you call your occupation, because I'm sure maybe DJ oversimplifies it. What do you say?
I say I'm a musical janitor.
Okay, expound upon this.
No, DJ is accurate. Producer, songwriter, musician. I mean, I'm not sure how much background the students have on our relationship, but obviously, my background kind of starts in songwriting.
We're kind of going to get into it, actually.
Yeah.
I was hoping we would, but before we do, I've brought a little video clip of what you're doing these days, and we can start with that. So let me share this screen here, and then we can kind of talk about what it is that we're going to be seeing. Okay, everyone, stand by. Here we go. So here is the video. Okay, so this is your occupation, basically, right? At this point, this is at least a chunk of it.
It is yes, it's a large chunk.
And but that's a fairly new part of the Seth Jones that I know, because when I met you, you were a songwriter with your publishing deal on Curb Records. Now that's important to our students because, like the college you and I went to, this program that our students are enrolled in is part of the Mike Curb empire, the Mike Curb kingdom of entertainment.
Where does his reach stop?
Yeah, exactly. So you transitioned out of a Mike Curb College of Music like this into a publishing contract on Curb Records, and you were a songwriter at that time, right?
I was. Well, I actually started in a band, in a Christian band.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't think we had actually met at that point. Yeah, I don't think we met at that point. I think I had left, but I was at Belmont, started a little band. We actually signed a record deal to Curb Records, and that band wasn't my final form. And so I left pretty soon after that. And the way that deals were kind of done at that time, they were indentured servanthood. And so we had signed a record deal, and there was also a publishing deal that had gone along with it. And so Curb is some people might know, it's a record label, but it has a few different genres. And so they had a big country arm. They had Tim McGraw, Leanne Rimes, Rodney Atkins, those types of acts. And then they had a smaller Christian division. So I was signed to the Christian division, but under the umbrella of the company, my publishing deal fell under the same umbrella. And so all of the other writers were all country writers. And I loved writing songs and loved all sorts of different types of music. So when I left, I basically went to the publisher and said, I'm not doing the band anymore, but I'd love to continue writing songs. So could I just be a staff writer? And they re-signed me. So that's how I wound up as a staff country writer on the road in Nashville.
Okay, so you start in a Christian band, you become a country songwriter, and then you leave that town and move to Los Angeles, and this is 2012 or so, right?
Yeah, 2013. Yep.
Okay, you moved to Los Angeles, and what sort of weird transition is it that happens that you end up, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it wasn't your first DJ gig hosting a Grammy party?
It was. So
explain that. How do we get there?
So I wrote for Curb for a number of years, for 5 actually, for no money, full publishing, the whole shebang. And then I left that deal and I signed to a different publishing company at the time they were called Razor and Tie. They were based in New York, and they were eventually bought by a bigger company called Concord Music. And they're Concord now. And they're actually more of a Nashville publisher, but at the time they were a New York publisher. And so I started writing songs for them and was doing more film and TV work, more kind of acoustic, like indie, starting to dabble a little bit in pop. And that progression, because they weren't a Nashville publisher, their networks and contacts kind of extended beyond the normal Nashville network. And
right.
There was this is such a crazy story, but there was one day I got a call from my publisher who said, "Hey, there's a producer in town from Denmark, and he had a session fall through, and he's looking for a session." So me and a buddy of mine, who you remember Topher Brown?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, he's doing great. He produced the last little Big Town record. He's doing great now. But at the time, we took the session. And so we sat down with this Danish guy and we just kind of stared at each other and we were like, well, what should we write? And he was like, well, because my publisher in Germany, he was from Denmark, but his publisher was in Germany. He goes, my publisher in Germany has this act that's like a doo-wop YouTube group that's Warner Brothers signed and they're doing a big record, so we could write for them. So we're like, sure. So just in like as a joke, we wrote a I've actually never put all of this together. This is really funny now that I tell the story like this. We wrote like a 50s doo-wop song, and it was called My Baby Left Me for a DJ. And it was all about how like these guys played guitar and their girl ran off to be with this DJ. It was so corny and cheesy.
Okay,
well,
we've got 15 participants. First person who can find and stream My Baby Left Me for a DJ wins the prize. That's 5 bonus points for any class in the music production program. If you can find and stream My Baby Left Me for a DJ, I'm sure it's great. Yeah. Okay, go on.
Yeah, it's atrocious. But it happened to be like the premier song on that project. So Warner Brothers Germany like pinned it as like the #1 song in all the writing camps around the world writing for this project. So it brought a lot of like attention to us. And so my publisher was like, well, then you guys you should go to Europe and write there. So Topher and I took off and we went to Berlin for a couple weeks and I started writing. That led to other trips in which I kind of built a network of publishers and contacts and labels around Europe. And I was kind of bouncing around writing for different artists and producing records in Europe.
And hold on, Seth. In the chat, we have 2 links to YouTube for My Baby Left Me for a DJ, and your story is on pause right now.
Oh, no. Is it live?
We are sharing this screen. Oh, man.
Head is spinning like a broken record. My baby left me for a DJ.
No, is that it?
That's it.
Who are those people? Who are the baseballs?
They are...
hold on.
They were actually a YouTube group that was covering songs in that style.
The answer's right here in the description. Singen ein fantastique a cappella version ihrer Song My Baby Left Me for a DJ.
You can't even get the recorded version in the US. Like you can only find live versions because just because of like all the rights.
Amazing. Amazing. Okay, so go ahead.
Yeah, so that actually turned, I wound up getting a lot of cuts in Europe and had so much fun, like Berlin and Hamburg, and I went to Sweden and
I mean, it's my opinion that having your song chart in Europe is a lot cooler than having your song chart in the States.
It sounds a lot cooler, and the thing that most people don't know is it's way easier to get songs cut in Europe than it is in the US. 1, because the quality of music's just not as good, and 2, because if you're a native speaker, everyone wants to write with you because so much music is done in English, but lots of the artists aren't native speakers. So they want someone who understands the language and all the colloquialisms and like all the things, that, so I found some, had some success there. Well, I was writing for Razor and Tie at the time. I left that publishing deal because I wanted to own my own publishing.
Okay.
So when that happened, I kind of came out into this new world by myself for the first time. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to go back over to Europe. And through these relationships, there was a band who had come to the US who was from the Netherlands. And they were like this kind of, I guess, like adult contemporary, like rock band. They were awesome guys. And we wrote a song together and they kept telling me, they're like, we live outside of Amsterdam. Like, if you ever come, you can use our studio and we'll set you up with some sessions. So I was like, okay. So I went to Europe and I just called them. I was like, hey guys, I'm going to come to Amsterdam. Like, we should work. And they're like, okay, great, come. So that was my first time in Amsterdam. And we wrote a few songs together. I actually had 2 songs of theirs recorded. I had a couple of their singles. They're in Dutch, actually.
Why do I guess that songwriting is not the highlight of your trip to Amsterdam? Go on.
That's another story.
Yeah.
So I had that trip. I got a couple of records with them. They were signed to BMG at the time. This is a long story, but I think it's interesting. Well, they were published by BMG in the Netherlands. BMG had bought a publishing company called Talpa Music, which was started by this guy named Peter Van Bodengraven is his name. He's kind of like the grandfather of publishing in the Netherlands. He signed A-Track and all the big dance acts to Talpa. So
Okay.
he was at BMG and was their publisher. He heard the songs and contacted me and was like, hey, I love your work. Are you published? I said, no. He said, well, if you ever come back, like, I'd love to get you plugged in. At that point, he had moved to Cloud9 Publishing, which was the sister publishing company of Armada Music. So I went back to the Netherlands and I got connected with all these DJs who were at Armada and were making records. And so at that point I was producing like a lot of pop music and I kind of had some dance sensibilities, but I had no idea what the scene was like.
Okay.
So I wound up in a session with this DJ named Julian Jordan. And he, at the time, he was like probably 19 or 20 years old. And I remember sitting down with him and he pulled out all these tracks and we would start, would show them to me and we would write. And I looked at him and I was like, wait, what do you do? Like, I don't understand. Like, how does it work? And he goes, oh, well, I show up to the club and I've got my USB stick in my headphones and I plug in my USB stick and I pull up my songs and then I play. And I was like, what? Coming from years and years and years of schlepping gear and loading vans and like,
Right.
I was like, that sounds better. So it kind of put this bug in my ear and I started, I'm kind of got in with some of the A&R there at Armada and I just started sending them songs, all these songs I had sitting around, and they all started getting cut by all these DJs because at that point and kind of still, they were the most hungry for records because they weren't really writing.
So I'm going to ask you what you asked that guy. What do you mean when a DJ cuts your song? Is he re-recording the track, or
usually they'll just take the vocal and produce
and they'll
the
remix
vocal
around it?
Yeah. Now in my case, I was producing as well, so I would send them kind of half-baked records, and they would take that production and produce around it or add a drop or whatever.
Okay.
So that was happening. I was getting a few cuts, and I remember this DJ Dash Berlin had a song of mine, and he was playing the Sunrise set at EDC, and I happened to be in Vegas, and so I don't know anything about dance music at this point. So I called them and I was like, hey, I'd love to come. They're like, oh, we'll get you a pass. So I picked up a pass, and I thought I was headed to a show to see this DJ play one of my songs, not realizing that EDC is the largest rave in the world, 400,000 people. It took me 3 hours to get there from Vegas to the Motor Speedway. I show up, my mind was like blown. I'd never seen anything like it. So I came back and I was like, all right, I'm writing these songs, but I don't have any of the master. I've just have the publishing on them.
Right.
And now in this world of streaming, I was like, the master's valuable. I said, so I'm going to be an artist. Like, I'll make an artist project and I'll do all this collab. And I'll tell DJs, well, if you want my songs, then like, we'll collab on it together. So I said, all right, the next record I have is going to be a collab. So I had this record called Hung Up, and I was actually in LA and I met with a manager who managed a group called Tritonal. Played it for him. He was like, I think the guys will love it. They loved it. I got in contact with them. We started working together. That song has like almost 40 million streams now. And that kind of led to a very fruitful relationship.
40 million is not a small number, man. I mean, that's a pretty significant cut.
Yeah, I went from zero to DJ real fast.
Yeah, that's impressive.
So,
is that your most played track right now in electronic music, at least?
As an artist, yeah. So back to your original question, the way I wound up as my first gig at a Grammy party was it's still at this point I was just like, well, I'm going to get master ownership on these songs. I'm collabing on records. And this song was really taking off. And I happened to be I was back in Amsterdam. I was at ADE, and the head of the label, who was in London, basically cornered me and was like, man, we love your records. Like, if you want a place to release more records, we'd love to have you here at the label. And I was just like, oh, okay. Like, he never heard any more music of mine. I didn't really get it. So I came back, and that same manager kind of sat me down. He was like, look, do you just want to release records, or do you actually want to be a DJ? Because if you do, like, we all want to kind of build you and your artist career together, from touring and label and all that.
Amazing.
So I took a really long look.
You've got a fan in the chat, by the way. So someone, our friend Anton, who's in one of the classes, really loves the Tritonal song that you just wrote.
That's awesome.
So there you go. I know several of our students listen to Tritonal. So there you go.
Yeah, they're. I mean, Chad is one of my best friends. They've taken me out on 2 or 3 different tours. We've done all sorts of records together. They're awesome guys.
And that was basically the genesis of it. I mean, that's how you transitioned into this whole thing. That's really where we get here.
So my manager called me and he was like, here's your first show. You're playing a Grammy party. I was like, I don't know how to DJ. He was like, we have 2 weeks, so figure it out. So I got on Craigslist, bought some CDJs, and
right. You're like, I'm gonna open a Guitar Center credit line. You know, it's time to hurry up and get this done. Okay, so that's how we get from Seth Jones in a Christian band to Seth Jones country singer to Seth Jones producer to Seth Jones electronic musician, right? Okay, that pretty much runs through that. Now, Seth Jones, are you ready to play a game?
Let's play.
The game is death metal or infectious disease. You have to tell me. Well, I'll give you the name of a band or an infectious disease. You tell me, which is it? Hold on, I got to put on the effect. Chikungunya. Death metal or infectious disease.
I'm gonna say infectious disease.
Infectious disease is correct. Chikungunya is a viral infection transmitted by mosquitoes. Symptoms include muscle pain, headache, fatigue, and rash. Next, Viralac. Death metal band or infectious disease?
I'm gonna say death metal band.
Viralac is a death metal band. All murder, all guts, all fun. Syphilitic stillbirth, death metal or infectious disease?
Now, this is a tough one.
Mm.
I'm going to say death metal band.
Oh, syphilitic stillbirth is a C-to-C infectious disease, but easy to mistake for death metal band dying fetus. An easy mistake to make. Dengue fever.
Infectious disease.
Trick question, both. Dengue fever is both a Cambodian rock band and an infectious disease. All right, so let's talk about how we know each other now. So I've dug up some pictures from our past. What session was this? Because this has to be early in the mix, right?
That was Heidi Rojas' session, wasn't it?
Might have been.
It was.
And oh yeah, Vibe 56, man. Our friend Ben Strano from Nashville, who is just finished today producing another 1,000th episode or whatever of the Fine Woodworking podcast, is on the chat. Yes, that's Vibe 56. So yeah, here we are early in the time we knew each other, right? Yep. And after this, I guess we knew each other because we had gone to Belmont together, right? And this kind of segues into something I try and drill into people, which is like college network and the people you meet here and how they will, some of them stick around in your life and career following this experience. And I think certainly you and I were an example of that. Although we went to college together, we started working together after college, right? And that was because, if I remember right, you just showed up at Vibe to produce. What would have been the first?
So I had a country demo session, and I didn't have an engineer.
Oh, this was still when you were writing for Curb.
Yeah, I was writing for Curb.
Right. Okay.
And you were the house engineer at Vibe.
Right. Yeah.
And so we came in and worked together,
and then that was shortly thereafter, though, you start producing other acts instead of just your own demos. Yeah. And I think maybe Heavens to Betsy was one of the first bands that you brought in. Yeah. And it was kind of around that time that we latched on to sort of our backstory connection, that we knew each other through the college network. And we were constantly running into and working with other people from Belmont, right? I mean, I know you were hiring Belmont musicians on a semi-regular basis.
It's all the same. I mean, that circle, it was all the same circle.
Yeah, yeah, and that circle still lives to a certain extent. Do you still work with any of people from the college network?
Uh, Honestly, like there are a couple. Yeah, like it, I mean, I don't work as there's now I'm kind of siloed a little bit, so I'm working mostly by myself or with a handful of collaborators. But I do in Los Angeles. I run into people. In fact, I was the other day. In fact, I think you know them. I was meeting with a friend of mine who manages Miley Cyrus, and she works at uh, the huge Madonna's. Um, they're the biggest Maverick.
Oh yeah,
She
yeah,
works
yeah.
at Maverick, and there were two girls there who were they were sitting out on the patio, and one of them was Sheila. You remember Sheila? Oh, I forget her last name. You would
Not
know her.
yet.
I think she was your age.
Not yet.
And there
Yeah.
was another girl who they both went to Belmont, and we hadn't seen or heard of each other in over 10 years, and so we start talking all about the dorms and all the memories, and yeah, my
There's
network is still.
When I went looking for your contact in my computer earlier, last week or whenever, when I reached out to you to do this, one of the first things that came up was our old Belmont 2001 or 2002 phone directory that listed like what door you were. Like you were in Pembroke and I was in Hillside, so I looked way down upon you. So
Yeah,
I was clearly in the upper
it
echelon.
was rough. Pembroke was rough, man.
And like, but if you think about the names that are in that directory too, like there are so many people who are working in the still in the business right now at all various levels and positions,
Oh, it's
who were coming
yeah.
out of sort of that class, that like 2000 to 2005 kind of era
Yes.
of
It,
Belmont.
the ones that like I talk about are, I mean, the Florida Georgia Line guys were there. We went to school with them. They weren't even doing music at the time. Like
One of whom, ironically, also went to this school that starts
oh
at
really?
Daytona State. Yeah, and is from Ormond Beach. I don't remember dude's name,
Oh,
but
that's cool.
dude is a benefactor and donator to the program. So we will say nothing more about it. Okay, go on.
Listen, wildly successful and very talented. They were at Belmont, and the funniest story I think is our freshman year. So you remember the foyer like at Pembroke where the
Yes.
TV was and everything.
Yes.
There was a little couch there, and
Right.
every night we would come in, and there would be this guy sitting there on the couch watching the MTV that was just on reruns, and we'd get up to go to class in the morning.
I know
You know
exactly.
exactly. Okay.
Yes, go ahead. Finish it
So
off.
the next morning we'd get up, and he'd be asleep on the couch, like, and it became this joke. We're like, does this guy even go to class? Like he's in school.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
he
Right.
wound up dropping out. He didn't make it. A year later, he winds up winning the first season of Nashville Star. He was Chris Young, and
Right. Who
goes
still
on,
has a huge career.
huge career. So probably like this is probably 7-8 years ago now at this point. I was in New York with an artist that I was performing with, and we were doing a radio show at the Sirius headquarters in downtown Manhattan. They've got they're at the whatever floor, this big skyscraper, and the studio it's incredible. It's just two floors of the whole building, and it's all open looking over the city. And they have this like glass studio that is completely like see-through. And so they cycle artists in and out of that studio.
Right.
Because all the different Howard Stern's there and all the different networks are there. And so anytime anyone's doing a live performance, they put them in here. And they stack them up so much that they've got a holding room where the artist would come before they go to the performance. So it's a mixture of artists, and it just so happened that Chris Young was going in to do a performance right after we were. So there was a moment where we were kind of all just sitting in this holding room, like no one knows each other. And I kind of looked at him and I was like, hey man, this is going to be really weird. But like 7-8 years ago, I went to Belmont, and I remember, and he looked at me and was like, oh my gosh. Like we had this crazy moment of like, so yeah, I would say to your students, like, there's a tendency to want to like leave your peers and contemporaries and kind of reach for like the people that you see who are successful or do all these things. But the truth is that like you will all rise together, and however long you stay in this, the people that you start with, some of those people are going to be there, and the ones who are still there in 15 years, they're going to be the ones who are running the labels, who are selling millions of records, who are producing hit records, writing hit songs. So build those relationships now.
Yeah, and hold on. My line is always like, if any one of you ends up doing something amazing in the industry, then all of the rest of us know someone doing something amazing in the industry, and that's really the game. Is just to know the person who's doing it. You know.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's listen to a song that you is this released yet? This Love song?
No, this is going to be released. So this is from I have two artist projects. One is SJ, and the other is a project called Lev. And that's kind of a duo project. There's a female vocalist named Audrey Assad who is my kind of
who's
musical,
absolutely amazing.
Yeah, she's my musical soulmate. And so this is going to be our next single that comes out probably beginning of May.
Okay, let's listen to it for a second. Oh, and juggling. That's juggling.
Wait. That was it. Was that your birthday party?
This is at Ben Strano's house, actually. If Ben is still there.
So
this was when I was getting ready to.
Yeah, you're about to leave.
Yeah. And so I have that. If all right, here, let's listen to the song in glorious streaming mono. cut it off there. But to get back into the chat here, so you have the session for that pulled up, right?
I do.
All right. Will you share that screen? And question from the chat here. Anton says he's sort of questioning what genre would you put that in? Is that trance?
Yeah, it's trance kind of. We call it kind of more melodic house, but trance melodic house. They're kind of, I don't know. There's this new like kind of blending of those genres a little bit. I guess it's not like fast trance. It's not quite as aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
And melodic house seems to be the term that like people are using, but I would include it with artists like we've done a couple collabs with a new artist named Prana that's in that space, Lane 8, even kind of like Yotto and some of that stuff. So yeah, trance you can call it trance.
Okay, trance it is. Anton says trance with tropical influences. That was his read on it.
I like that.
All right. Pull up your session for us, and let's see if you can just sort of walk us through. First of all, how many man hours or how many Seth and Audrey hours go into putting together a track like that?
Many.
Is there oversight, or is it really just the two of you working?
So she's in Nashville. And I'm in Los Angeles, and I go back and forth, and she comes back and forth. Most of the work is I do kind of by myself. She's literally the type of person that songs just fall out for her. So we'll sit down, and within 10 minutes, she'll write a whole song. We've gotten in an Uber ride to a show, and she's written an entire song in her head on her phone on the ride to a show.
Amazing.
So like parts of the creation process happens real fast. The refinement process it happens over a very long period of time, and it's a lot of man hours. Part of that is a creative exploration. The rest of it is actually trying to get it to where it needs to be.
That makes sense.
I would say probably on this song 60 hours. I mean, yesterday I spent 4 hours working on a mix that I scrapped and then started over.
I don't think that's surprising. That feels right to me. First of all, what platform are we looking at here? What is this?
At Ableton.
Ableton. Okay, cool. So Ableton is one of the two platforms that our students are working on in this program. So this looks familiar to them. And tell us sort of what's going on with the session here.
Yeah. So.
And you don't, really, the thing I'm excited about is getting to the point that we can sort of open this up for questions. So you can just give kind of an overview of what's happening in your process.
Awesome. So the way I typically like to arrange my sessions is in the latest version of Ableton, you can do groups within groups. So I like to keep it really organized. I've got, I usually have like a master group that has everything. So in case I want to change whole sections, I can just come up here and copy and paste things around.
Sure.
And then I've got my drum groups with kicks, claps, loops. And then I do this differently kind of every time, but right now I've got like all my effects, like risers and noises within that group.
When you say risers, explain further.
Yeah, like all the sweeps and kind of noise, white noise builds up and cymbals and those sorts of things.
Can you solo something and give me an example of what that sounds like?
Yeah, let's see here. And also this session is like, there's a lot going on, so I'm not sure how it's going to run with the Zoom open, but let me see if I can. Yeah, it's going
to choke. Okay, yeah, no problem.
So I probably won't be able to, but I mean, I'm sure they'll know the white noise kind of sweeps and the falls and all that. And then
where do your, when you talk, I saw there were at least a handful of kicks there. Where do your sounds come from? When it just gets to something as fundamental as kicks and claps or that sort of thing, where are the samples coming from?
Yeah, I mean, most people, I love Splice. I use a lot of Splice samples.
Okay.
I of course have gigs and gigs and gigs of libraries from years that I use. There are certain things that I make here and there if I want something like really specific. Every once in a while, I'll design a kick if I'm like can't find what I'm looking for. I want to get a little creative, but typically I'm making samples, or I'm using samples and layering and EQing and doing all those things.
Okay, and when I see like I see loops over here, loop tracks 23 through 30 or whatever were loops. Where are those loops coming from? Is that also splice stuff, or where does a lot of that come from?
Yeah, it's a combination. I mean, for me, like great top loops and like in dance music, you know, the groove is, other than kick and bass, like most important thing. So I've got a lot of different top loops and hats and shakers and those sorts of things. Some of them which I've made, some of them which I pull in, and a lot of things, even if I'm using like a sample, like let's say I pull a loop off a splice, I'll usually chop it up and change the rhythm and you know, make it kind of fit my needs. So they typically come from there. Yeah, and I do like, it looks like on this one I built my own and with some different like claves and congas and those sorts of things here.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of editing, it looks like, that went into that.
Yeah. Yeah, and so then I have my basses and then keys and synths, and then vocals as well. This is actually an earlier version. It's cleaned up a little bit more in later versions. But what I'll typically do is have all my kind of lead vocals, like lyric vocals, in a group, and then all my chops and vocal effects and those sorts of things in another one. Because for me, like for collaboration, like when you really are working in this way, something that's really important for efficiency's sake is being able to export stems and work with other people. So I set my groups up in ways where when I'm done with the project, I can print all my stems out through my group buses, and it's already kind of organized in the way that I need it to.
Sure. That's amazing. Okay, so you do a lot of session organization and that sort of thing. It seems like our electronics, the electronic students, the people in my classes for whom that is the focus, are the ones who get the most excited about routing. So are you? I mean, the thrilling edge of your seat world of audio routing. How important is, are you doing a lot of like, you know, running side chains and throwing things, you know, to buses and all of that? Or how important is that to you and the success of what you're doing?
Yeah, it's very important. You know, I mean, so much, you know, Scott, we kind of come from the same audio world, and honestly, a lot of like newer producers and probably your students have a huge advantage against people like you and I, because all the things that when we came up learning about audio and mixing that were drilled into our head about you never do this, you never do this, you always do this, all of that stuff goes out the window in electronic music. Like, in fact, I started to realize really early on that anytime I would hit like a ceiling in which like I couldn't get over a hump somehow, it was usually because I had some past rule in my mind where I was like, oh, well, you never slam a compressor this hard, or you don't put 3 compressors in a row, or you don't do this, or you don't do this. And the more I started to work with other DJs and electronic producers, I realized like they were doing all of those things, and it was a completely different world and a completely different way of mixing and thinking about sound, especially when you're getting into sound design.
I like that. Okay, that's good information. That's good to know. Do you mind if we open it up for questions from the house here?
Yeah, for sure.
We've got about 15 or so participants right now. Hey everyone, if you want to ask a question, either hit the chat or pop on your camera and mic and let's see your face. Come on, don't be a coward. You can do this. Everyone's going to be shy now. That is very unlike all of you.
I don't know if I can see the chat when I'm in screen.
Bottom of my screen is where I've got a chat button that opens up. But maybe you're not seeing, maybe you don't have that. Okay, well, if no one's going to ask any questions. Oh, okay, here we go. A couple have popped up. First question, where the last track that we just listened to, what was the title of that again?
Cloud of Witnesses.
Cloud of Witnesses. Where is that going to be released, or where is any of the music that you're working on released?
Yeah, it's anywhere fine music is sold and streamed.
Okay,
So,
and type in type in what in the search bar to get your music.
so that group is called Lev. It's LEVV.
Mm-hmm.
Which are on Spotify.
And there's already plenty of Lev music on Apple Music and Spotify, right?
There is this.
Okay.
So this new, a lot of our older stuff is kind of like, I don't want to say pop, but it's a little bit. It's less in the dance space, and then
Okay.
our newer stuff has moved more into this kind of trancey melodic house world. And then the stuff that we're about to release really goes deep into that.
Okay. And what's the other? There's Lev, and what's the other artist project?
And SJ.
SJ, which is where a lot of the featuring tritonal and tritonal featuring SJ can be found, right?
In fact, I have a little EP. I've got 2 songs to come out on Friday.
All right. Friday is the release day for new music. The next question, when making tropical house music, what do you start with first? Melody, chords, rhythmic, lyrics, etc.?
Yeah, that's different for everybody. For me, because I am kind of first a songwriter and musician, it typically starts with a song. I don't make a lot of tracks on my own. A lot of like DJs will, create full tracks and then we'll send those tracks out to
Sure.
the top line. That works really well, but it's my method is like a little bit different. I like to start with a vocal or to start with some kind of production idea and then build onto that.
Okay. Are your synths mostly in the box, or do you have favorite hardware units?
Great question. So these days, actually, let me see. I'll come back and share the screen, but I'll show you.
Yeah, spin that camera around. Let's see the gear.
So
Enough of your face. Let's see the gear.
you can see this guy back here. This is my
Gorgeous.
newest purchase, the Moog 1, which is a fantastic machine.
Calm yourselves, everyone. Calm yourselves.
I've got a core. If I can see it. Got the Milo here, and then I've got a Moog grandmother here. I'm finding myself these days moving more outside the box. I've of course I still use plugins here and there, but I don't use soft synths as much anymore. I'm trying to kind of, for creativity's sake, but also like there is certainly a difference between a sine wave coming out of a Moog and a sine wave being generated in a VST.
Yeah, especially I find when we start layering things, it's like the culmination, all those pennies add up to dollars somewhere in the process, right?
Yeah. And there really is, like, being a musician, coming from guitars and pianos and those sorts of things, there's a spirit to an instrument, and I'm kind of rediscovering that in the world of synths. There's of course something to be said about soft synths and how easy they are and how portable. I mean, when I was traveling around the world, I was producing records on trains and planes and hotel rooms and everywhere, and that's great. And I've designed kind of my setup so that I can do that, but it's really cool to have a physical piece of gear to be able to create, especially something that's so deep as the one. Like, it's almost endless.
Let's talk about these panels behind you. Did you rob a Joanne fabric?
No,
made from my grandmother's couch.
Yes, I did pick them myself. I went down to the fashion district, and I like, you can't really see it, but kind of my studio and space is very, I've got a little, you see that? Got like a big skull.
Oh yeah, a satanic skull. Yeah.
Got one above me.
Amazing. A couple more questions coming up here. Let's see. What did you learn during your career you wish you knew sooner? And where would you? Let's start with that.
Yeah. Well, I'll say it's actually less. Well, okay, a couple things. One, collaboration. Like I think the thing that holds most people back is not having access to people who are better than they are. And as much as you can work with people, as much as you can get around other producers and get in the room together, even if they're not as good as you are, because
Even with a 6 foot minimum.
yes. But when you're watching someone else work, everyone has different ways that they do things. And I've been with some of the, Scott, you'll appreciate this. One of my really great friends is a guy named Jason Evigan, who's he produced the last Ruthless to Soul record. He wrote and produced Girls Like You and What Lovers Do, like hit after hit after hit after hit for years and years and years, hugely successful. And he told me one time that, like, for probably the first, he had a #1 pop record. He wrote Heart Attack by Demi Lovato. And he was
which is an awesome song.
records.
Which is an amazing track.
That was his first cut. That was like his
Incredible.
first. Yeah, he was in a hardcore band for that. But he said that he works in Pro Tools, and he was watching another guy work one time, and the guy snapped into grid mode and moved something on the grid, and he goes, whoa, what did you just do? And the guy looked at him and he goes, grid mode? And he goes, yeah, how did you make it like stay on the line? And the guy was like, he showed him, and Jason had been producing entire records in slip mode and was cutting up every drum hit and lining it up by eye on lines. That's like, that's an extreme example of that. But when you watch other people work, like, you will get so much better because you'll learn those types of things. And I mean, I learned so many things from you just watching you work, and you'd hit a shortcut and I'd stop you like, wait, what was that? Like, that takes me 3 clicks to do, and you just did it in 1. So that's one thing. The other thing is, and I'm kind of, these records are all coming out on my own label now, and I've worked with different record labels over the years and publishing companies, and the system is not designed for you. It is not designed to build your career. It is designed to commoditize what you create. And it's worked different ways in different kind of eras of the music industry.
Sure.
And it's a little bit sneakier in this one because deals are easier to get. There's more money now coming in because of streaming and all these things. And so what happens a lot of times is artists sign these deals that are much, much better deals than they were in the past, but they still create, they don't build you as an artist. Even if you get streams, like Instagram followers do not matter. Socials do not matter. Even like
controversial opinion. Okay, awesome.
It's 100% true, because you're not, if you want to be an influencer, they matter. But if you want to be a musician, your Instagram followers do not equal fans. And Instagram followers also don't equal streams. And that's what you're going for. And even with streams, like, I had almost 30 million streams on a record of mine, and still, like, I didn't have any fans because my music was just on playlist. It was in the system as a commodity that the record label and Spotify was using in order to generate revenue. It didn't translate into people who said, I'm an SJ fan. I want more SJ music.
Amazing. This is where we should have started. This is fantastic. Okay, keep going.
Yeah. So I would say, like, the slow build, like, if you want to be around for a long time and to have longevity and to make a living doing music, it's not, you won't do it in the way that you think that people are doing it. All these people that you look at with hundreds of thousands or millions of followers or whatever, like, I know them. They live in apartments in LA and they don't, like, they're not making that much money, and they can't sell tickets. Like, I know people that have hundreds of thousands of followers that can't sell 50 tickets. And I know people that have 10,000 followers who are headlining, massive shows and festivals and those sorts of things. So you really have to, like, keep your eye focused on what it is that you want, and keep the ownership of your music, because that's really, and I'll use this example too. People don't realize this, but now in the age of streaming, you can make money, right? If you're getting streams. But if you, like, let's say you sign your catalog or a song to a record label and you get 10 million streams on a record. Well, that's good. At $5,000 per million streams, that's $50,000 worth of revenue.
Sure.
Well, if you've signed even a decent deal, and let's say you have 35 points on that record, that is, by the time you recoup fees, vocal fees, and all that, like, you might make $5,000 on a song like that. And not only that, but now what's starting to happen is that investors can look at a catalog, and they can look at streaming data, and they can make projections about what a song is going to make, which means they can make an estimation on the value of that asset. So there are investment groups now that are coming in and buying master catalogs from independent artists for a normal multiple on a catalog like that would be 5 or 6 times.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a friend right now who's a part of a deal, and they're talking about a 10 to 15 time multiple on her catalog, which means that she's a relatively successful independent artist. She owns everything.
Mm-hmm.
But she's still, she's had a rough few years trying to make it. Instantly multimillionaire. Like, that's a multi-million-dollar sale of her master rights. So you got to think, like, the music that you're creating and releasing, it's not just generating a dividend and a payment to you. It's also an asset, because as you build that catalog, that has value over, it's a revenue stream in perpetuity. So protect that revenue stream and don't give it up because a big label or, a flashy company wants to release a song.
Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. So, I mean, clearly, that person who was just kind of getting by with income has something that someone sees long run in, is kind of what we're getting at.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are just a couple more questions, and we'll try and wrap this up. But first, I do want to say I will give priority to anyone who has the courage to flip on a camera and microphone and ask a question face to face. We will supersede the chat queue here if anyone dares to ask Seth Jones a question face to face.
Let's see it. Let's see your quarantine face.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not wearing pants.
I'm telling you, hygiene is the first thing to go out the window. I don't know what LA is like right now, but our governor just hours ago, said tomorrow night at midnight is mandatory lockdown for 30 days. Everyone's staying in for non-essentials. So yeah, it's gonna get hairy.
I've been in for 3 weeks. It's a shit show over here.
Amazing. Well, fortunately, it doesn't hurt your creative output, I imagine.
No.
Anyone? This is your last chance. Where's your courage, you cowards? Okay, let's go to here's last 2 questions we'll say on the chat here. One, let's see. Okay, last 3 because one of them is going to be probably a shorter answer. Favorite mic for vocals?
Manly.
Depends on the vocal, right? Depends on the vocal, but generally, if you're just going to grab one and take it to the session with you,
it's always the Manly. Back in our day, Scott, I used to shoot out $50,000 worth of mics on a vocal. Everything is the same these days.
The Manly consistently wins. Yeah. And that's the Manly reference mic, the
black and
they're big, the big black tube.
Yeah. And it's not because it's the best mic, it's just because at the end of the day, in my genre of music, it's kind of a standard and it all comes out in the wash.
Okay. Very good. I mean, you are doing a lot of effects processing and things in the genre. So yeah. Okay. Favorite DJs and why?
Favorite DJs. I love Lane 8, Ben Balmer. Some like early influences, Calvin Harris, like those. I love a lot of the UK kind of house stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But the stuff that I like, if I put on music and listen to, and the sorts of shows that I absolutely love, it's in that kind of trancey melodic house world. Lemonade. I love those. I love those shows. I played a lot of shows where there's this massive energy and there's confetti cannons and smoke, but I kind of like a little bit more of the refined energy. The guys that really know how to create energy and momentum and kind of move it over time.
Sure. Hold on. I think Dale, are you is your mic on? You got a question? Maybe not. Maybe we lost him. Okay. Let's see here. Favorite places you mentioned you've traveled a lot. Favorite places?
Yeah, my favorite cities are, I love Berlin, I love Amsterdam, I love London. As far as music cities, those are my 3 favorite.
Okay. Dale's mic. He says my mic doesn't work. Why were there slow spots in the track that we just listened to?
That's actually a great question. You couldn't really hear it. So typically, arrangement is so important in electronic music, and it goes in between grooves and breaks. And that where you couldn't hear anything, that was a break. There's actually a kind of prophet synth that's like playing these chords through that. It really starts to grow over that. And that's an example of like where there's a groove happening and then there's a big open break that gives the listener the chance to like breathe. And then slowly like it starts to build back up. And right after that section, it goes into a really big build and then into another drop. So yeah, there actually was, even though there wasn't rhythm, there was music kind of playing underneath it. The mic just didn't pick it up.
Well, it because I mean, the streaming audio quality over any of these platforms, this is something we've been fighting with since we all got quarantined out. But everything turns to mono. That's the first thing you notice, and then it is all like frequency band limited and heavily lossy, compressed in the process. So that is just the price we pay for trying to do this in this live format. Last question. We will end on this, and thank you for your time. But any advice for starting DJs and producers?
Make as much music as you can, and work with people who are better than you.
I got a question on top of that, which is if you're making as much music as you can, how much of it do you instantly throw up on SoundCloud when you're sitting in your bedroom? How quickly and how often, and is there anything that you should hold back for any reason? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And Bob Lefsetz, did you used to read the Lefsetz letters?
No.
He's an old music industry curmudgeon who would write these like kind of scathing emails, like letters all about all things music industry. And he said one time that it's not your job as the artist. Quality control is not your job as an artist. That's your fans will do that for you. So the output that an artist puts out, the stuff that's good is going to rise to the top. The stuff that's bad is just going to fall away. And I think that, there's certainly people who would disagree with that and to say like, well, no, you want to, but the age that we live in, music, and I said this earlier, music is a commodity. Like it's something that people consume, and there's so much of it and it's so easy to make that if you want to build a career as an artist, you have to consistently release music every 4 to 6 weeks. There is no exception to that. Wow.
Okay. That's brutal. That's breakneck.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. Well, I think that's a great place to put a bow on all of this. This has been fun, and maybe we can do it again sometime. It's funny. The last time we did this was in 2014, and you were a whole different person at that point. Yeah.
Wow.
And we spent half of our time talking about you hanging out at Miley Cyrus' house at that point, right? And so this has been an entirely different web chat. Of course, it's an entirely different music industry in 2020 than it was in 2014.
It's an entirely different world.
Yeah, well, exactly. Let's try and do more of this. Let's try and do it more frequently. If not, I'll see you in 6 years, okay? It's been pleasure, man. It's been great. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. We had a good full house here of people watching with us. So thanks, everyone, and we will all catch up later. Thank you, Seth.
Amazing. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Seth.